Thank you for having us up here. I know some of you, it wasn't your decision, but you're going to have to endure through this, so thank you in advance. So I have been unemployed, and I'm homeless now, and it's been 2 days. Yeah. So, but don't be too sad for us. This was a decision that was purposeful, and I think more than that, it's been God's design, and so we wanted to share a little bit of that. Not to mention, we're going to be traveling for like 5 months, and we're going to settle in Hawaii, so it's nothing to be that sorry for us about. Wow, I feel like I'm so loud today. Yeah, so I guess where I wanted to start was this whole decision started about last year. We were vacationing in Hawaii, and around that time, I just remember going through an existential crisis. That's hard to say. I had been working at Reebok for like around 5 years at that point, and I saw a lot of amazing things happen in the mission that I was a part of there. But it started to slow down. Some of the missions that were given to me were already accomplished and was done. And I had a very close mentor in my life. He left around that time, and some of the things that I knew I had an answer for at work just wasn't gaining any traction. And I was struggling with just the very existence of why I'm at Reebok and all that kind of stuff. And I remember we were in Hawaii, and we were in Maui specifically, and I was in the oceans looking out onto the island thinking like, God, it's so great here. Why couldn't I just live here? What would I do? And I started thinking about it more productively, and I came up with some ideas. And I would say at minimum, the worst of those, and what I had learned by that point was, we're living in a really cool age where we have the internet, and there's a lot of good and bad things about that. But what's really cool about it is that we're connected, and the connection and the ability to build trust through those connections, it's like almost free. And it's a really revolutionary time, and that's why I've been encouraging Jenn to do her YouTube channel. And I was like, well, the worst case scenario is I can help Jenn to continue to build what she has, and that would be a meaningful endeavor. And so that's kind of just the fun thought that I had. But the crazy thing is and Jenn will tell you her side of it, but we came back after that trip just joking about it because we're not that big of a risk taker as a couple. We're not big risk takers as a couple, but we had like 7 or 8 very specific signs, if you will, or incidences or occurrences within the week of us coming back, which didn't immediately cause us to say, okay, we're going to go now. But it felt like God was saying, consider it, right? And so we did. And for the next 3-4 months, we were praying about it, considering it, and thinking it through. And most importantly, asking the people around us, like, hey, we're thinking about maybe making this transition. What do you think? And I mean, we even kind of floated this by some acquaintances and possibly strangers, I don't remember, but everyone, overwhelming response was, yes, in your position, if I was there, I would do it, and I think it's a great idea for you guys. And so, that was the first sort of step.
I'm not going to cry. Hi, I'm Jenn. I'm Brandon's wife. So, I think I'm supposed to share that moment in the ocean, right? So we went to Maui last year, and I specifically remember this one day where we woke up and we crossed the street from the Airbnb we were staying at, and we got to the beach, and there were only the 4 of us there. So it was Brandon, me, my sister, and her boyfriend, and it was completely empty. And I remember just going into the waters, and it was just Brandon and I in the water. And I remember, like, first of all, I'm not a good swimmer, so the whole time I'm just struggling to, like, just keep my head above water. I'm just treading water. And, being a city girl my whole life, like, I lived I moved out of Seoul when I was 5, and then I lived in New York for 20 years, and I've been back in Seoul for the last 6 now. So the whole idea of like crossing the street and, you know, being at a beach, like, and being in the water with no one else around, it was like this calm and peace I just was not used to. And I remember having all these thoughts like, God, what would it be to live here? And I mean, of course, it's like so basic, right? Like, who doesn't want to live in Hawaii? Of course, it's beautiful. You know, I had all these thoughts. And I remember one of the first things that popped up was, what are the chances? Because I just don't see Branding wanting to leave Reebok. Like, because like he said, we're not risk takers. Like, we're not just going to move without a purpose or a plan. And so I kind of like dismissed it almost. And I'm having these thoughts about how beautiful it is. And then like a second or two later, like Brandon looks at me and he's like, what do you say to living here? And I was like, stop. Like, I didn't know if I was really confused. Like, were we just talking, or did I say my thoughts out loud? It's one of those like dreams that you have that's so vivid, and you wake up and you don't remember if you dreamt it or if it was real life. But it was, you know, we've had a lot of those like very pivotal moments in our marriages where I'll think something and then Brandon will like answer it, or it's very, very it's weird. I know we're not like sign people, and we don't ever claim that like God speaks to us in a dream. We're just not that type of people. So I just want to throw that out there. Like, it's not like a common occurrence. And no offense if that's how God speaks to you, cool. But I just don't want you guys to think like, oh, we saw like a picture of a palm tree and now we have to go to Hawaii. So, you know, we sat on this we prayed about it for like close to a year, and just all the stuff that God's been lining up for us. It's been unimaginable. Like, nothing, even though I'm a really great planner, I couldn't have done that myself. So it was all God.
Yeah, so as we're preparing for it, I guess another really amazing moment was, I would say for about half a year, we're like, oh man, what do we do? Do I, you know, there was some opportunities. Like, do we do like a camp? Do I get a remote job so that, you know, as we're building this platform, whatever that looks like, I can at least, you know, we can at least have some income coming in to feed us. And so that would be nice. But we just kept struggling with it and not really putting our plans to paper, right? And so I remember this one time, it was like just like crap. My contract, actually, I decided not to renew at that point, and it was going to be done, well, November 30th, so it just happened. But we're like, oh my gosh, the time just keeps going by. Let's put some plans down and start to action some of these things. And so I get out my planning templates, and then we're sitting at a coffee shop doing all of it and trying to make a decision. And eventually because we were debating like which island, right? Commercially, this island makes more sense, but God seemed to have said, you know, planted this seed in Maui. I don't know. So in that moment, we're like, okay, we just need to make a decision. We wrote down Maui, and then we did some other planning. And yeah, that night I was preparing for the presiding, like I've been doing for most of the year, I think. And that week, it's a really nice thing to do, because then I reflect upon the week and what God's doing. And I remember I was journaling that week, and there was this one time where I was writing about the oceans, and I was writing in a way where it's like, oh my gosh, that doesn't even seem like me writing this, like the way that I was connecting and weaving ideas together, and the insight I was getting into what I was writing, it just didn't feel like me. And so I was telling Jen, like, hey, you know, I was writing about the oceans, and this is kind of what I'm seeing, and I want to share this. I don't know why, but I want to. And I don't even know if I shared it that next morning, which I may have. I'm not sure. But yeah, that was what I talked about that night. And the following day, and she'll fill you in on the details of the significance of that. But the next day, I presided, and I was up here, and I was listening to one of the praise songs, and there was a part that came up. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Right? So a lot of you are nodding your heads because you know what this song is in reference to. I didn't know at the time, and it was just only that part that I remember. The rest of it, I didn't even know what it was about. But I remember breaking down and being moved, because as I'm going through this process and I'm learning about what my strengths are and the weaknesses associated with those strengths, I just felt like God was telling me, I know you like to have clarity and those things are good, but he wanted to grow in me this sense of trust or faith. And I was noting all the people around me that were like really good at that. Like my wife, she has really good instincts and trust, and I like to dismiss it because it's like if you can't say them to me, then it doesn't count, that kind of thing. And so, and then I've learned since then that that's not the case. You can't always articulate those things, but anyway, that's why I was moved, and I think Jenn, you'll take it away with.
I'm the supporting storyteller. So Brandon gives you what happened, and then my memory for these things, it is way more vivid. And we've told this story so many times, but it always brings me back every time I tell it. But I remember it was one Saturday, and this was so important because it was the first time we moved from this dreaming, hoping stage to actually planning. And it was a Saturday morning, and our dear friend Sung-chan, he's one of the best people we've met in Korea. He just happened to be in Korea because his wife and my friend Sandra, she was with her kids in Canada visiting her family. And they just moved house, and we got an invite to their place. So we drove over to Ilsan, and right before we went to their place, Brandon was like, hey, let's go to a coffee shop. And, if you want to make Brandon happy, like spreadsheets, project charters, if you're like, show me your spreadsheets, like that makes him so happy. So, no, you don't get to jump in. So he always talks about project charters and planning and all these things. And he wanted to take me through this template that he uses at work to plan for Maui. So we go to a coffee shop, and he's guiding me through it, and I'm like really into it because I see like that's where he thrives, right? He loves that. And for the first time, we were actually like making lists of, because I love making lists, so it's like, what will we bring? Or Brandon's like, hey, let's just go crazy and just write down what are all the things that we're afraid of. Like, it can be big or small. And I'm like, mold. I'm terrified of mold. Like, I don't want to send anything that's gonna grow mold, like mattresses and bedding and all of these things, right? So that's where my brain's at. And Brandon's like, okay. So he's like, what are the chances of mold? Okay, if it's 10%, how would we solve this problem? And he actually like didn't make me feel crazy. He let me go through this whole thing, right? What is it, mitigated risk or something? Yeah. So we did that for like an hour and a half. Are you embarrassed?
I didn't think you'd go into this much detail.
Oh no, but this is so important because I was telling Brandon, like, this day was so exciting to me because one, like, Sung-chan invited us over, that's a very exclusive thing. And two, like, I'm doing this thing because Brandon's always talked about it, and I know it means so much, and he was really excited to do this with me. So again, the first time we went from the dreaming to the planning stage, and on our way home from Ilsan that night, Brandon, who is very analytical and very planned, for whatever reason, he's like, hey, I don't know why, but I feel very strongly about sharing the analogy of oceans, like the paradox of something so majestic and sustainable and life-giving, but also like this really uncontrollable, like terrifying thing, right, that can destroy like thousands. And I was like, okay, like, I like that you're really listening to your intuition. You don't know why, but let's do it because, feelings are valid. And that is a big thing that, goes down a lot between us because I'm not as factual and articulate as Brandon is. So I'm like, yeah, I'm really encouraging like going with your feelings and your gut, and if you want to cry up here, you should totally cry up here. I like brought a hanky for him and all this stuff, right? So we are he says this, and then on Sunday we go to church. Brandon presides, and as you guys know, if he's presiding, he's up here somewhere, and I'm usually in the back. And Oceans comes on, right? And it's a song I've heard many, many times. And for me, it didn't really have any significant meaning in the past. It was, another Hillsong song to me. But I remember the one part where it talks about how, stepping into the unknown, where, my feet may fail me, and fear surrounds me, but you've never failed me, and you won't start now. And for someone who's such a planner and a worrywart, like, I was just sobbing, like, back there. And, you know, after service, we're on our way home, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe Brandon saw the song list on Sunday, and he saw that we were going to sing Ocean, so then he wanted to, you know, do the sermon before the sermon. You guys know when Brandon's up here, right? So,
sorry, Pastor Joel.
So, you know, in the car, I'm like telling him about like how I was crying, and he was like, oh my gosh, I was crying too. And of course, I'm like, what part were you crying in? And he was like, yeah, the part about like, you know, trust without borders, because that's him, right? It's like, if you want me to move, you're gonna have to do this, because I'm not gonna do it without the plan. And I was like, babe, you know what that song is called, right? And he had no idea. And then I told him, and he's like, what? Just so floored. And that night, we were on our way to our friends Peter and Sandra's. They invited us over for dinner. And I was like, hey, can we listen to the song again? And then we turned it on in the car, and I remember just driving towards their place, and like the sun was setting, and we're like really listening to the lyrics, and we're both like sobbing. He was sobbing. I teared up a little bit. And then I was like, babe, like, we're going to Maui. Like, that sealed it for me. That was like the final confirmation. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
These are for all the times you keep telling people to subscribe to my channel. This is very bad.
Subscribe, by the way, guys. Look up Jenn Rogers with 2 N's. Anyway, so thank you for that. Where were we going? So, you know, we've been toiling and wrestling with this issue for basically a year and a half, and ever since that sort of affirmation that God was giving us to encourage us to go and keep exploring and keep understanding how He's wired us and how He wants to use our talents. It's been slowly coming into focus, and I guess there was a certain point where you know, I wish I could have thought this through more, but I was realizing that I'm trying to get too much done and getting nothing done at all, and it felt like God wanted me to focus. And so I was kind of looking through the list of my projects and trying to tie them together in a way where it's like I'm piercing, like I'm going to try to pierce or go for the highest possible aim, is seeking His kingdom, right? Essentially, that's what what I was trying to do there. And so, you know, I'm sitting there trying to consolidate all these projects. Like, what is it He's wanting us to do? And He's like, okay, well, oceans. Well, what are we trying to do with the oceans? What is that song about? And it's, you know, the song is basically about Peter stepping off the boat. And I was like, cool, ocean walking. Cool name. All right. And so I was inspired by that, and I looked at the story of Peter again, because, you know, when I up until that point, I always, and I shared this presiding a few weeks ago, so, you know, bear with me if you've already heard this, but I always thought that was like an admonition of, like, if you lose faith, then you're in trouble, kind of thing, right? Because he, you know, Peter steps off the boat, and he gets scared by the waves, and he starts to fall in, and Jesus saves him, and he essentially says, you know, why do you doubt, or why do you have so little faith, or something like that. And so it always seemed like a warning to me, right? And so when I re-looked at that story in light of what God's calling us to do, I read it again, and, you know, the situation is they're going across the lake, and there's a storm that hits, or water, is it a lake? Anyway, they're going across, and Jesus was sending them ahead first, and the storm hits, and they're all afraid for their lives. They're in the boat just being tossed around, possibly going to die, and then they see this figure coming up to them on the water, and they think it's a ghost, and they're freaking out. And Jesus said, hey, calm down, guys, it's me. And I mean, they're still afraid, of course, because they can't really see him. And Peter says something weird. He's like, if that's you, let me come out into the water with you. And when I think about that, it's like, if he really doubted, would he ask that? Because what's the upside, right, if he's wrong? And, he's the one disciple who steps off to the boat and he takes some steps. And really, when I realized, oh my gosh, he walked on water. He was like probably one of two people that walked on water. And on top of that, it's like with Peter saying this, like, if it's you, let me come out there. Jesus wasn't like running up onto the boat and smacking him like, dude, I told you it's me. And then he said, why do you doubt? It wasn't like that. And so when I noticed that, like, he stepped out onto the water and God let him participate. God let him participate in something so heavenly. And I saw his heart, like, you can do so much more. Yeah. Why do you settle for so little? That's essentially what he was saying. And his heart broke, I think. And it made me realize that I think in a lot of ways I do settle for too little. I dream too little. I underestimate what Jesus can do. Not what we can do, but what he'll allow us to do if we test him like a child. Like, I want that dad. And he's a good dad. He's a good dad. And so, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that story, and I'm hoping that you see how good he is, and that's what we're trying to share in our insufficient ways, but it's certainly not us that's going to let us walk on that water, and we would appreciate your support in all this. What we are trying to do is, with my work and what I was involved with, and with Jenn and sort of our relationship and how it unraveled, what we want to do is try to bring about redemption or God's will in relationships and partnerships. And we're still looking for that higher resolution understanding of what it is. So we can't necessarily summarize what it is right now. But the reason we're going to travel and we're going to set up in Maui, Maui's not the goal, guys. And we don't know if we'll be successful or not. But the intent is that we want to dive deep into that. And through her YouTube channel and through the things that I'm learning to help set up these things, we want to, help with the marriage relationship or help with partnerships in general. And we could definitely use prayers because it's a big one. And so, thank you for your time. Sorry I cried, but should I?